Good morning, and thank you for having me, and thank you for setting up this forum. I also want to start off with just a quick note to recognize that that very gracious introduction will probably be undermet with the nature of this presentation. There's several really dynamic people that are here today that I also wanted to thank and acknowledge, and one is Alan Leonardi, who is currently the director of the Ocean Exploration Program in NOAA. Another is Mike Walker, who helped me put this presentation together, and a third one is Ola Varmer, who is part of the NOAA General Counsel team, who has been working with us on all these matters of exploration, international law, and shipwreck preservation. We're not just about shipwrecks, we're not just about any one thing, we're about everything when it turns to the oceans. So let's dive in. What if you were to notice a planet in this solar system or the next, and you were to recognize of this planet that it had a toxic or hostile atmosphere to humans, at least the majority of it? If you were to find that it was unmapped to human known origins or our ability to surveil and quantify, if we knew that there was life on this planet, if we knew that there was non-photosynthetic life as the dominant life form on this planet, if methane was a huge driver, not oxygen, and if we knew that we could harvest anti-cancer compounds from this planet, how much do you think we would spend to go to and explore this planet? But truly, that is planet Earth. That's one causation I'd ask you to consider as to why we need to explore the Earth's oceans. And if there's any of those attributes I just mentioned that you don't feel comfortable with, I'm happy in the Q&As to take your question and to recognize this is an unmapped planet. This is a planet dominated by an environment that is hostile to human beings. We cannot breathe seawater. People experimented with that in the 60s, and it was pretty interesting, but not effective and not productive. And this is a planet on which we have found in those oceans anti-cancer compounds, and because the origin of human life came from the oceans, the chemical processes in those primitive organisms are the basis of our chemistry. So that which goes wrong in our body can be better understood by understanding the early evolutionary stages of life that are found in the ocean. Well, we've been at this for some time. This is not NOAA's earliest program of ocean exploration. This, I think, come on, I'm trying to waken you up here, liven you up early in this morning. This was not our Mod 1 Mark 1, but it goes back pretty early, and humans have sought to answer questions about the ocean and understand the oceans better for quite some time. We've had some pretty cool old ideas, which have become some pretty cool new ideas, and even some contemporary systems. And the one you're looking at the lower right is actually a part of the current US Navy submarine rescue system that puts a diver in a one-atmosphere flexible suit. That idea came about in the early 1900s, which you see on the far left, but the concept and the engineering has been perfected up till current days. Now, a lot has changed over time, and this is NOAA's pedigree. This is NOAA's roots and origin. This shot is of a Coast and Geodetic Survey officer, and those of you who enjoyed Skip Taber's presentation, Captain Albert Taber, who currently is with the NOAA Library but had retired after a very honorable career serving with the NOAA Commissioned Corps. This young lad, you might note what his grade is. He doesn't have that many stripes on. You can also consider him potentially expendable, because what he has in his hand is a package of explosive material, basically a bomb. That's in his right hand, and in his left is a stopwatch. So he's going to start that fuse, light that fuse, throw the bomb over the side, and wait for the bomb to settle into the seawater, hopefully at some distance from the hull. It will then explode, and the explosion will send a sound wave to the sea bottom, and then back up to a hydrophone on the ship that's listening for it. And we will then map a very deep part of the ocean based on the delay time return between explosion and echo. You with me so far? When this goes wrong, it goes really bad wrong. But when this goes right, we get a depth determination of the ocean. Well, fast forward, today we have electronic means to produce a little chirpy sound rather than a big bang. And that little chirpy sound can be with a single transducer or with a multi-phased transducer, and we can get pretty much an underwater photograph of the seabed. And we can really understand at a high degree of resolution of the seabed what's underneath the water. We've not done that with very much of the world's oceans. We've only done that with about 18 to 20% of the United States exclusive economic zone. 20% of the United States exclusive economic zone. We are underperforming, unfortunately, but that's a public choice. That's not a recognition of anything that's going on within the Department of Commerce or within NOAA. But for commercial interests, we should pay attention to that. We've heard many people cite that there are better maps of the moon and the planets than there are of planet Earth. The Scripps Institute of Oceanography hosted a mapping colloquium several years back, and they produced this very illustrative graphic that shows on the left-hand side a piece of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a submerged feature on planet Earth, not too far away from where we might vacation on Eastern Shore, and then a comparison with an equal-sized area, same square number of nautical miles, on the right-hand side, and you could just see the level of definition and the fidelity of a mapping product that is rendered for a planet rather than our own home. There's a little problem with this. When you try to map in oceans, you're mapping through water. When you try to map a planet, you're mapping through often the vacuum of space or just an open atmosphere with very minimal gaseous components. Physically, it's easier once you propel a rocket up to that planet, but the complexity of working to map the Earth's oceans deals with pressure, deals with temperature, deals with many other facets of physics that fluids like water present to us that gaseous atmospheres don't. So it makes sense why we have better maps of those planets, but it's an embarrassment for us as humans to say that we know our own neighborhood quite poorly. May I ask how many people might be familiar with this map? Very good, very good. Would you be surprised to learn that most of the seabed features on this are interpretive, artistic interpretation, rather than solidly founded scientific knowledge to affirm each location? And that is the truth. This was produced as an artistic, supplemented rendition of the Earth's oceans. It is remarkably accurate, but it is not absolutely foolproof, proven, or positive. This map lends the public a mistaken impression that we know a lot more about the oceans than we really do, and it is not illogical what features have been hand-painted into this, but these features are not affirmed by scientific surveillance in order to confirm the facets of the oceans. What you're looking at in the blurred background is satellite-surveilled fidelity or relief of a particular area of ocean in the Atlantic. What you're looking at on the inset is from a surface vessel using the transducer-like device I described earlier, an electronic chirping device, a fathometer or a multi-beam fathometer. We could see the difference in the fidelity of the detail that we can detect on the seabed, and this is in about 1,500 meters of water. So it's not insignificant. It's off the continental shelf, and it's in deeper water. But satellite oceanography answers some of our questions. It is a proxy for our ability to really know what's in the ocean. So we could detect that there is a Washington, D.C. underwater, for example, from a satellite. But we can't know the neighborhoods, we can't know the complexity, and we can't know the life that lives within it. So this comparison shows us the distinction between mapping by satellite, which adds to our knowledge base, but it doesn't complete our knowledge base because you could see the difference in the features that we're looking at. Here's another example, and now I'd like to twist this around a little bit to further remind you of not chest thumping and tell you how much we know about the oceans, but I'd really like to humble myself here and explain to you how little we really do know about the oceans and what marvelous discoveries we're making very late in the game, very recently. Consider the Galapagos Islands. Anyone here been there to the Galapagos by chance? I highly recommend it if you're interested in ecotourism or understanding your planet, understanding evolution. Darwin's papers on evolution were rooted in observations he made in the Galapagos Islands, but one of the most absolutely startling discoveries that came for evolution of life on Earth came not immediately in those Galapagos Islands, but within the exclusive economic zone in an area called the Galapagos Rift. So let me digress for just a moment. I'm a proud graduate of a responsible academic institution in New Jersey. I'll not embarrass that institution, but I'll tell you that when I received my degree in 1979, as I stepped off the podium, I realized that it was completely obsolete, and my degree in zoology was remarkably underprepared because just 2 years earlier had been the discovery of tube worms, an exotic extreme life form we called worms which really aren't worms, because we didn't know what else to call them. And that discovery totally turned on its ear the idea that we have plants and animals. And then we got these little squiggly things in the middle. The little squiggly things in the middle turn out to be a far more dominant life form than any collection of plants on dry land or any collection of animals, wet or dry. They are the more dominant life form on Earth. Not tube worms, but the whole collection of microbial colonies that exist. And actually, those worms are not worms. They're not polychaetes. They are aggregates of single-cell and multi-cell organisms that come together in a community. They look like, but they aren't what we think they are. That could go as an accurate description of just about everything that's under the sea. So in the Galapagos Rift, let's talk now about where that discovery took place. Think of that first shot I showed you, how big and how wide, Google Earth or any other representation you might want to look at. Zeroes on in, and I was telling you we don't know much about the Earth, about the submerged portion of the Earth. So we're on the Galapagos Rift. In there, we're looking at an area in that rift that basically is equal. If you could see the orange line in there, maybe somebody in the back just give me a wave if you could see the orange line in that superposed circle. Thank you. That is the distance between DuPont Circle and the Key Bridge, to make it local. That is the distance equal to the portion of the rift that we examined with human-occupied submersibles and also with robotic vehicles that were manipulated and operated from a surface. That is the neighborhood within which we found hydrothermal vents that were producing the release of minerals, mineral-laden hot water, and that was the environment that we found these tube worms in, and we continue to find them. The more we look, the more we find. But this isn't a walk in the park. It's hard to get there. It's also not a walk in the park in terms of discovery, because a lot of that bottom is just flat and unremarkable. Geologically charismatic, in other words, lumps and bumps and things. It's not just flat sand. But the areas where the vents are found are interposed, intermittent, not continuous. So it is really an exploratory venture to go down and find these. But the killer is, think about how small that area is. From a metro stop to a bridge in Washington, D.C., that's the area covered to find this dramatic and remarkable discovery that we have this whole other life form that's not based on light, it's not based on photosynthesis, it's based on chemosynthesis, and it's a much earlier form of life in an evolutionary prospect. And we only discovered this in 1977, 1978. That's remarkable, how much we don't know. Tube worms, for the illustration. So, how much of our planet remains unexplored, undiscovered, and undocumented? As technologically sound as our society is, 95%. We have not laid human eyes on far more than 95%, but as an accommodation of what's been mapped, what's been studied, what's been digested, we have a long way to go. That we could only discover something as dramatic as tube worm colonies and hydrothermal vents in the late 70s, that's pretty remarkable. This is the Tamu Massif. Massif is a geological term for a very large structure under the sea, kind of like a mount. And Tamu, in case any of you are graduates of the Texas A&M University, that's what that's all about. And Texas A&M was the discoverer of this particular feature. It's the largest geological feature under the sea, not tallest, but largest. You don't sneak one of those things in if you really know your neighborhood. And only in the past decade was this discovered. Now's about the time that we need to recalibrate where we are and think about what's going on here, how much we do know and how much we don't know. So Ola, may I borrow you? You're probably not familiar with this device, but I would just describe it generally. Ola and I play in a band together, so you can surmise anything else you want. Now we're going to put a clear beverage in here, just to the, don't drink it, just to the amount. And could you read the label, please?
It says water. Water.
Completely.
Seawater.
Thank you. Seawater. Can you fathom the notion that there are 1 million microbes in a shot glass of seawater? Anyone disbelieve that? You're a very trusting group, but it's true. The compression of life in just a shot glass of seawater at a microbial scale, it's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. But that's our planet. And because we don't see it, we're not inclined to believe it, and we're not inclined to have curiosity about it. We only seem to really enjoy and pursue our knowledge on the things that we can see. But there are millions of microbes in small quantities of water. And they do dramatic things to our Earth, and they do dramatic things to our life. They basically give us what is most precious to us. And I'm going to show you right here a zoom of stained microbes. You don't normally see microbes with such color. You have to stain them in order to look at them. But what I'm calling out to you in the very center is a genus called Pelagibacter. Pelagia is open ocean, bacter as in bacterium. And the Pelagibacter is a pretty unique critter. It's got the smallest genetic package of any single-celled organism. Now, viruses are smaller, wrapped up packages of DNA. But for a microbe, this is the smallest known package of DNA. Interesting, anecdotal, but the importance of Pelagibacter is that these bugs, these critters, range anywhere from 25 to 50% of the bugs in that shot glass I showed you. They are remarkably abundant. They must have an important job. What they do is digest organic material in order to make available the minerals that plankton needs in the ocean. That's nice, McLean. What's that have to do with anything? That plankton produces 50% of the oxygen we breathe. 50%. Do we know how Pelagibacter responds to matters like oil spills or climate change or increased sea temperature? Not yet. 50% of the oxygen we breathe is dependent upon these bugs, the most abundant bugs in the ocean, doing their job. We just discovered these, we, not NOAA, Oregon State University and other scientists discovered these within the past decade. The past decade. How much do we know about this planet? How much do we know about this ocean? We survive on these bugs, and we just figured out that they exist and what they do. We have a ways to go. Now, what could this possibly have to do with ocean exploration? Let's go back to the bugs. Let's go back to the microbes. A compelling question for NOAA, which has quite a bit of responsibility in scientifically assessing oil spills and helping the Coast Guard to clean them up or to get ahead of the progress of a spill. Oil and oil-based products were liberated at depth to the surface and into the atmosphere. We had a magic group of atmospheric chemists who figured out what the flow rate of that was from the atmosphere. That's a whole nother talk that we could give. But in terms of the oil that was entrained in the seabed at about 1,500 meters, and it floated on into what was described in newspapers by lay press as a plume of oil, it actually was carbon compounds of 6-chain rings, and it was part of the material that came out of the well. Other parts float to the surface, other parts were atmospherically evaporated and constrained in the atmosphere. But the part that stayed in the seabed was digested by bugs, bacteria, that we did not anticipate, we did not know could do that job, and a remarkable, if not marvelous, amount of that material was digested. It had environmental consequences, and that's being proven and litigated now as we speak. Those environmental consequences are not the subject of the debate. The fact that there was a microbe that was capable of digesting such a voluminous quantity of these 6-chain carbon rings shouldn't be a mystery to us if we really know this environment. This was right in our backyard. This is our own exclusive economic zone. This is where we harvest and recover resources to contribute to our economy. Well, here's another one I want to share with you. I'm very proud to say I took this picture myself. And it's a no-light rendition of what the undersea looks like. It's dark. You lose light at about 1,000 feet. Certain places like where I grew up in New Jersey, diving there, you lose light a lot sooner than 1,000 feet. I'm talking about in the water now, right? And it's a tough place to operate. That's one of the reasons why we don't know what we don't know. But another reason is because we just haven't looked. So, let me travel to a different place now. What do we know about the ocean? So, tough questions. In fact, I was invited to a forum where I was told this mystery voice out in the distance, a very deep, tonal baritone would be introducing the speaker list. And they said this godlike voice will emerge and introduce each speaker. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting because I'm going to lead with 4 godlike questions, and they are these. How many fish are in the ocean? What will the weather be like tomorrow? What will the weather be like 30, 50, 100, 1,000 years from now? And this one, Does a wise man build on shifting sands? So consider those four godlike questions. And we have this very proud agency inside of the U.S. Department of Commerce called NOAA, and our principal mission is to answer those four questions. That is what we do. We in NOAA, an environmental intelligence agency, as Dr. Sullivan, our administrator, would remind you, these are our missions. How many fish are in the sea? That's our ocean mission by and large. We manage the nation's marine fisheries. What's the weather going to be like tomorrow? You hear from these good folks every day, the National Weather Service, part of NOAA. As far as the weather 100 or 1,000 years from now or 30 years from now, that's climate science, and that's what we are very much a backbone of inside of NOAA for the United States government. We join other agencies in performing this task, but most of it is NOAA science. And coasts, building on shifting sands, the National Ocean Service of NOAA is responsible for addressing those issues and making sure that we have a sound and robust coastal management policy for all the coastal states in the United States. That's our mission. That's what we do in NOAA. We're very proud to see, for at least the first time in my 33 years in NOAA, that NOAA is included in the Department of Commerce strategic plan. And I applaud any of you here who had anything to do with that, because we're now part of the family. NOAA is about 50% of the Commerce budget, about 50% of Commerce people, and it's really nice to be in the plan. So we're proud of that. We're proud of that, and we appreciate the support. Secretary Pritzker has been a remarkable advocate for NOAA in the department, and we feel it, we appreciate it, we see it, and we're embraced by a reception through the entire process that I have never seen before. And I just want to express my gratitude to anyone here who's part of that Commerce family who's contributing to that. But we are tied to the Department of Commerce strategic plan. We are a major component, if not the component, of the environment objective. Data, we produce big data. We also make it available to the public so that economies can be built on it. There's a multi-billion-dollar industry in aftermarket weather services that come on what NOAA provides through the National Weather Service to the public. And then, of course, in terms of operational excellence, we're all contributing to that objective, but that's very much one that we take seriously because of the significant complications in our operations. So as an environmental intelligence agency, we start with basic observations, and that's really what the Ocean Exploration Program does. We explore to observe, we record what we find, and those observations lead to long-term observations in the same or similar places, which then lead to an assessment, to modeling, and eventually to forecasts and predictions of the environment. Our current priorities right now for NOAA in Kathy Sullivan's leadership is to make our communities more resilient, that's wet and dry communities, coastal, inland, et cetera, to evolve the Weather Service, produce more modern products or enable the Weather Service to improve its extension of forecasts, and to invest in operational infrastructure. A lot of this is satellites, a lot of this is wet infrastructure that helps us in our mission. And of course, back to the Commerce goal, achieving environmental excellence. We do that across NOAA by putting people in the water to look at bleaching coral and other subjects. We have a proud fleet of NOAA ships that travel certainly throughout the United States EEZ, but also throughout the world, answering tough science questions. We have satellites that surveil planet Earth and bring us information that adds to our knowledge and understanding and gives us our weather forecasts route information. And we also work with ships and unmanned or unoccupied platforms. This basically is, I declare it a perpetual motion machine. It's pretty amazing. There's a second half of this little device that's under the water. This is commercially made by some really smart people out in Silicon Valley, and they're working with the ocean community quite widely, and we've used these devices quite often. If we could take sensors that we formerly had put on ships and put them on devices like this and still get the same science answers, we're saving the public a whole lot of money. So we're looking at that. More on that to follow. We've even recruited some willing, in some cases not so willing, oceanographers, but we're looking at a marine mammal in the upper left who, duly permitted under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and Endangered Species Act, is carrying a transceiver, and we're finding that as the animals traverse the marine environment, they are actively collecting science information that we would find remarkably expensive if we were sending a ship to sea to gather that same information. It also gives us information about this animal and its cohorts, what their population is all about, what they feed on, what they need for environmental conditions and the like. So it's a win all the way around. And then finally, the supercomputer environment. NOAA has been enabled over the past couple of years in budget cycles to increase its access to high-performance computing. This is giving us the means to improve our forecasts, and to produce better models and to be serving the public in a far more accurate way. A dollar spent on high-performance computing has multi-dollar returns on it in a remarkable way. So, a little bit about NOAA, a little bit of background, and let's get back to why we explore. How much money does the coastal economy generate? I'll just let you read through these, but please, the notion here, and I hope you take it, is that we have a remarkable amount of our economy concentrated on the coasts and in the ocean environment. The transport of all of our goods, we're giving you 75% of tonnage coming into the United States, but over 90% of goods come into the United States by ship and by sea. We are a maritime nation. We're a hungry nation. We feed ourselves with many things, including fish. We have a seafood appetite, and we are a net importer of seafood. Globally, we have to manage fish. It's a huge economic driver for many coastal communities, and there are a lot of people and a lot of dollars engaged in that. Economic facts of energy. In the Gulf of Mexico alone, 30% of the nation's energy is produced there, and that number's probably going up as we improve our ability to handle gas rather than oil. And that's Gulf of Mexico alone. This probably would be the surprise to you. The numbers, $1 trillion contributed to the US GDP for tourism, marine-based tourism. So why do we explore? Why do we want to know more about this environment? Think of the bugs, think of the examples I've just given you about what we don't know, compare that to the environmental benefit that we're extracting from the ocean. Do we have any basis of knowledge to think that we're optimizing that extraction? Do we have any basis to really think that we are maximizing our protection of that environment to sustain that economic harvest? If we don't know the things I've just cited that we don't know, what else don't we know? I'm starting to sound like somebody. I better stop right there. So back to planet Earth, another approach and concept. How much water is on planet Earth? Would this illustration surprise you that if we bundled up all the water, fresh and salt, and put it into a three-dimensional graphic and compared the two spheres, one sphere, all the water, which you see right over the central United States in this image, and the balance of the planet is now dry. Relatively speaking, the oceans are not that deep when you consider the dimension of our planet. Yet, that thin veneer of seawater that's distributed to 70% of the surface of Earth, or to constitute 70% of the surface of Earth, remains the barrier for us really understanding and knowing, number one, the biology of what's in it, most of which is microbial, and we can't see it without microscopes, and the balance of which is obscuring our ability to surveil the other parts of the planet. How about the atmosphere? Our atmosphere is really quite thin. It's just that, once again, another thin veneer, only in this case it's gaseous. 60 miles thick, some would argue even maybe 100 miles, but by the time you get to 100, you have nothing. You have no chemical constituents. You have vacuum of space. Consider how remarkable it is that in just a couple hundred years, we've managed to pollute that thin veneer of gas upon which we are dependent based on our CO2 productivity since the Industrial Revolution. That is remarkable. I mentioned earlier I grew up in New Jersey. I think I mentioned I grew up in New Jersey. I lived on one of the most polluted rivers in the planet. That river today is a Superfund site. It was very disheartening to me as a kid who had a lust for ocean-related stuff, to realize I couldn't swim in that river, and that if I got river water splashed in my face, my dad would take that bottle of whiskey and make sure that I washed my mouth out with Scotch whiskey. The cheaper stuff, the better stuff I learned about when I got older.
Was that Highland Park?
Good eye. It was disheartening to me to realize that water mass that my dad swam in when he was a teenager, I couldn't swim in. It was too heavily polluted. I was able to wrap my mind around the notion that what we do to a localized river can result in remarkable levels of pollution, to the point where the productivity of the water, the stuff that lives in the water is totally turned upside down. I got that. I could understand that scale and scope, particularly growing up in New Jersey where I could see how dense the population was that lived around the watershed that fed into that river. I have a hard time putting my mind around the scale and scope that we have polluted the atmosphere, that we are polluting the ocean in the way that we are addressing planet Earth, and we don't know the simple stuff that I'm trying to convey to you that we don't know. The harms we're doing, we haven't really fully comprehended, and the harms that we're doing without minding our manner of living is something that we need to get our arms around. So please, the point I'm trying to make here to really convey is exploring the oceans is very important to our own survival, ultimately. So we've come a long way in doing this, and not just through the history of NOAA's program, but NOAA's program goes back pretty early to 1807, back to Skip Taber's talk, but back to the creation of the Coast and Geodetic Survey, the very first science agency in the United States government. We went from sail to steam, and from steam to diesel in our fleet, and we're slowly making progress. Some ideas have popped up, and as I showed you earlier with the diving suits, they keep coming up. On the left-hand side is FLIP. FLIP is a academic vessel that can be transported horizontally, but then half of it sinks to have a depth profile capability through the water, and it can occupy as an ocean station much like a buoy would, only you can have people living on that buoy. On the right is the Sea Orbiter, which is a design from a group of French Imagineers, but also ocean engineers and ocean scientists that is underway. I understand they're actually cutting metal and starting to build this, and there's a lot of sponsorship around the world to help this become a reality. How many divers in the room today? Very good, very good. I think you'd recognize that that's not our common diving suite, and that's not how most of us started diving. That's a rebreather that is recreationally available. Military's been using rebreathers for some time, but our extended depth range, because of mixed gases and these types of tools becoming available to the lay public, are a remarkable opportunity for scientists as well. So things are changing. Well, let's look at the timeline for exploration. The continuum from left to right deals with precursor agencies before NOAA. You can see that NOAA started in 1970, and the Alvin, which recently celebrated its 50th birthday up on Capitol Hill, that was quite an exciting time. The Alvin was one of the early deep submergence vehicles that was available to the global scientific community, and now we have many. We have in JAMSTech, and we have a distinguished delegate representing JAMSTech, our close partner in Japan. JAMSTech is the NOAA analog, I would say, or NOAA is the JAMSTech analog in the United States. And we have a very close partnership with JAMSTech, and they have the Shinkai, which is a very capable deep submergence vehicle. We have China, Russia, France. We have other nations that have human-occupied vehicles. We look also at the autonomous vehicles. They started quite early. I suppose you could consider that the first autonomous vehicle was the military torpedo. But start replacing that payload instead of munitions with science sensing equipment, and we can really get a lot of work done with these devices. Back to what I said earlier, if we could replace those observations from ships where we have to pay for cooks and engineers and deck officers and line handlers with just a vehicle that can mind its own business and traverse the seas and come on back with that information, we're going to save a lot of money and force multiply quite quickly. That started that early, and we're still working to perfect those inside of our community. We start with the Manned Undersea Science and Technology Program, which was pretty much an underwater NASA, a series of explorers, divers, and equipment, including habitats and the like, that really put people in the water and looked at a future where humans might actually even live underwater for long periods of time. If you think about that, we do that today. Oil maintenance in the Gulf of Mexico and the North Sea involves saturation divers who live 2+ weeks in pressurized chambers. Sometimes those chambers are underwater, sometimes those pressurized chambers are on the surface, but they are at a deep sea pressure and live their lives to a significant extent that way. These early experiments helped to develop that technology and enhance our economy through diving technology to maintain the oil infrastructure, North Sea, Gulf of Mexico, and the rest of the world. Our habitat world continued on with the creation of the NOAA Undersea Research Program. Karen Kahanowicz, who's an aquanaut and is sitting over there in our audience. Karen, thank you for being here. Karen came over from the Navy and then helped to run our Aquarius, Habitat, and other missions of the Undersea Research Program. So putting people in the water and having people live in the water, a lot of economic gain came from those experiments and that initial understanding. We then start to move over into a combination of the autonomous and the steady state monitoring through buoy systems. We do a lot of that today. We don't have to send oceanographic research ships to the same place so many times a year to gain observations, which are pretty narrow in the timescale. We can put buoys in place, maintain those buoy networks with a ship that would just go out once, twice a year to maintain those buoys, recover the information, or bounce the information off of satellite. But we also then get ourselves from this very humble beginning all the way up to the creation of the Ocean Exploration Program in the year 2001. That largely came from the Undersea Research Program and National Marine Sanctuary Program, energy and initiative. And we had a NOAA administrator at the time named Scott Goods. And Mr. Goods had worked also on Capitol Hill for the Senate, and he very much understood the appropriations world and mechanisms, and he was able to give us $4 million in 2001 to start the ocean exploration program. So with $4 million and a new program, noting the expense of ships and the like, the key question was, what square nautical mile of ocean are we going to go and explore with $4 million? But our community is not a financially rich one, but it is an intellectually rich one. And we were able to build partnerships with other federal agencies, other nations, and other players so that we took that $4 million and accomplished 12 initial projects in our first year of activity. We were also able to attain what was recommended for us by a presidential panel, a dedicated ship for exploration. This is the NOAA ship Oceanic Explorer. And the way it works is this. We don't use human-occupied submersibles that much anymore. We use largely robotic devices. So we have this device called a remotely operated vehicle that is on the seabed. It's about the size of your compact Ford Explorer, not the full Expedition, but the Explorer size. And it has a tether that reaches back to an underwater suppressor, dead weight with lights and cameras. So it's a chandelier light, in effect, for the device to operate under, provides an additional source of light and intelligence by seeing where the vehicle is operating. That transmits up to the surface on a hard cable. I have a piece of the cable here which you're welcome to pass around. This cable, we have 6,000 meters of it. It can take a lot of weight, and it conducts the electricity down to operate the vehicle, and it conducts the image back up. And it's not an insignificant piece of equipment, and it's pretty heavy, but that goes up to the ship. From the ship, in the control room, we bounce that satellite image and distribute it on land to many different locations. The result of this is, and here's the real-life version of what that cartoon was. The result of this is that we have many more scientists participating than are trapped in the control room. Grainy picture, I apologize. That's during our Titanic expedition. I'm going to get to that shortly. But the discovery of the Titanic is on the left, and a badly aged image of me on the right. Our control room on the Explorer is this. And you would think that we were actually conducting a lunar landing. The complexity of the operation is about the same, only we're doing it here on our planet, Earth. Mirroring our activity are academics, technologists, graduate students, high school students, on the other end of an Internet 2 connection all around the world. And the growing number of these centers where we team up with academics and get the benefit of their knowledge applied to the observations we're making real time is giving us a huge reach across the science community. It's a very different way of doing business. And we're proud to say that we now have really two ships in our program. We have the NOAA ship Oceanic Explorer, a dedicated federal ship, and we have a private ship on the right, the Nautilus, which is operated by Robert Ballard and the foundation that he has created, a legendary explorer and a huge advocate of what we do, and we do it together. But now, we've got people like Google, and we have other private investors who have acquired wealth through many means, and they're investing in oceans themselves. So the challenge for us is, can we harness that energy and those dollars and apply them in a concerted way where we can gain benefit by working together rather than independently? All right, so I was asked by the sponsors to say a little bit of something about myself, and these are my beginnings in the center and the upper left, diving as a 14-year-old kid on shipwrecks in New Jersey. I've had a wonderful opportunity through NOAA to make a tour through the whole diving program and the like, but I also spent 25 years driving ships. That's probably a good day. Most of the days you're hanging on for dear life on George's Bank because it's pretty rough up there. And I didn't age gracefully, but that was during our Titanic expedition. I've spent some time in these deep-sea submersibles, which are tightly cramped. Here's a picture with the Russian pilot. This is the Mir submersible, one of several I've been able to make dives on. And on the right-hand side is George Bass. Anybody familiar with George Bass or his name? You're cheating. Dr. Bass is recognized as the father of maritime archaeology globally. And we were making dives to the Titanic to pursue some activity that Congress asked us to investigate. And if you're going to look at a shipwreck for the purpose of historic preservation, you either bring Ola Varmer or you bring George Bass. And Ola was busy, so I got George. Tight, tough, cramped. You and your 2 other friends are going to be together inside an area about the interior of a small car for the next 12 to 18 hours. Something else, this is the Aquarius habitat, which NOAA has proudly owned for decades. We're just in the process of transferring that to Florida International University, where we hope the academic community can pick up and run what had been a cutting-edge body of technology and still will continue to contribute to our science community. And this is also something I was very pleased and proud to be part of. This is the turret of the Ironclad Monitor, the Civil War Ironclad Monitor. If any of you go down Route 64 on your way to Outer Banks or anywhere near it, I implore you to take the opportunity to stop in at the Maritime Museum, the Mariners Museum in Newport News, and see the artifacts that came off of the Monitor. They're right off the highway, easy for you to visit, and you're back on the road before you know it, but you've been enriched with a significant chunk of maritime and U.S. history. So the recovery of the Monitor from off of Cape Hatteras was a project that we did with sanctuaries, with the exploration program, but also with the United States Navy. I think we all need to be proud of the Navy's contribution in this, because without the U.S. Navy, that turret would not have come up. Now, what has this small program accomplished? I started to tell you that we were year 1, 2001, we had $4 million. We're hovering around $20 million a year. If you multiply that by 1,500 times, one thing is that's a lot of money. The second thing is that's about how much NASA's budget has for human space exploration. So compare ocean exploration with space exploration, 1,500x is the delta. And I'd invite you to draw your own conclusions, do your own math. Given the problems that we have to manage here on planet Earth, given what we don't know on planet Earth, that is more than a rhetorical question whether or not there's a distribution that we need to be mindful of. So this program has mapped, and actually that's a stale number, it's in excess of 600,000 square nautical miles. We need to show you a map of the United States and show you how big 600,000 square nautical miles is. That's huge. That's about the whole eastern seaboard. That's a big chunk of the United States. We've mapped that with this program since 2001. The ship itself, the Explorer, the dedicated ocean exploration ship that you pay for as taxpayers, has done about half of that. That's pretty remarkable. One little ship doing all that. Over 1,100 surveys, the number of dives we've done. In 2014 alone, we've had 9 canyons, 5 seamounts explored. The number of scientists is exponential, and you can't carry that many on one ship. But our telepresence lets us do that. 5 historic shipwrecks discovered just this year alone, and this is key. This is really key. We're challenged to manage, as I mentioned earlier, that how many fish in the sea question. We're challenged to manage the nation's marine fisheries. We have to do that with information reliable enough to set quotas that an entire industry is dependent upon. Our ability to do that is in cases limited because, as I pointed out earlier, all the challenges of working in the sea and then having to extract that number from living populations of fish. But when we can discover new habitat for the fisheries managers to be aware of, to incorporate in their regulations that protect that habitat, if that's a nursery or a point of a fishery that really furthers and enhances the stock, you want to protect that. You want to be careful of that. If we don't have good maps of the ocean, how could we be sure that we've got all of that essential fish habitat known and quantified? This program has done a lot for it, and I think we are the new best friends of several fishery management councils in the Gulf and East Coasts because of work we've been doing over the past 2-3 years. They're realizing that as we start getting a little bit farther off the beach, on the continental shelf, and we start looking at that shelf edge in the canyon communities, there's a lot of habitat that people never realized was there. And habitat, when I say habitat, it's not flat, empty sand. There are charismatic components of geology, in other words, technical term, lumps and bumps on the bottom. And what lives on lumps and bumps? Corals, soft corals, other types of organics that fish can feed upon, or small micro environments can get established and help raise fish up to their adulthood. We had a pretty remarkable return in the number of gas seeps that were detected this past year on the East Coast. And in a cooperative that NOAA performed with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, we found a remarkable number of these gas seeps, 300 or so. Scientists who spend their careers studying this would surmise that these are not immediately harvestable sources of gas, much as we have in the Gulf of Mexico under salt domes. But these are, in fact, degradation of most likely methane deposits that are part of effectively a frozen methane mass in the sea. And a number of countries are looking at the feasibility of harvesting methane hydrates, as they are known, as an energy source for natural gas. This one, I think you might want to pay attention to. The Ocean Explorer, if you have a pen and a pencil, the thing to write down is Ocean Explorer, all one word, .noaa.gov. Really cool website. It's won Webbies and other kinds of awards. But the most fascinating thing is it's a window to the ocean for this program. 10+ million visits. And this one blew me away. I was notified by our team over in Ocean Exploration that we were approaching 1 million downloads of classroom curricula. So one thing that we do in order to foster STEM education and get people plugged into an ocean awareness is to produce for teachers, made by teachers, classroom lesson plans. I got a couple of nieces who are in the educational system in Montgomery County, and they impart to me the challenge of producing a lesson plan, the amount of time it takes, and all the hours that are invested in order to be a good teacher. If we can give the teacher the lesson plan that they can teach from, we're reducing their time, and we're helping them to bring ocean subjects into the classroom and satisfy state-mandated technology subjects in the classroom. So we were all ready to buy a birthday cake. I was even going to spring for the cake and put 100 candles on it and celebrate the 1 millionth download for the classroom lesson plans. And then my bubble burst. I realized, once I started listening, no, McLean, that's not for the whole program, that's just this year. And while I was wildly ready to celebrate, then they hit me with that this year, that we've gone over 2 million classroom education lesson plans downloaded, put in the hands of kids, put in the hands of school systems, and I would venture to say there's at least one kid per lesson plan, maybe more than one kid in a class. We're reaching a lot of youngsters with this. It's something I would encourage you to look at. Something else you can see on the Ocean Explorer is this digital atlas. Every one of those little dots is a major project that we have undertaken over the past 10, 11 years. And as you zoom in on it, you can even look at where the ship's tracks are, and you could see the degree of coverage that we have in the most important areas, which is the continental shelf edge and shelf slope. And you can see where we've been working all the way up to the Canadian border, out to the east, and seamounts that are part of our U.S. fisheries, because the fish stocks don't know geopolitical boundaries. They get raised in other places, and they come and swim into the U.S. waters, and a lot of work in the Gulf of Mexico. I could show you a similar image for the West Coast and other parts of the world, but I'd encourage you to look at that. Another project that this program has been working on in cooperation with the Ocean Service of NOAA and also with the State Department and Interior Department is to expand under the Law of the Sea Treaty, which even though we're not a member, ridiculous that we're not, but even though we're not a member of the Law of the Sea Treaty, we still abide by it. And in the Law of the Sea Treaty is a prescribed formulaic method of calculating where the extension of our continental shelf might be located. Now, we have an exclusive economic zone, and we have the opportunity to harvest resources and have control over those out 200 miles. But we can extend beyond that for resources that are on or in the seabed, and that's what the continental shelf extension is about. I want to thank Peter Oppenheimer in the second row with the General Counsel here at NOAA and Olaf for work on that project as well. Well, we've got some neat stuff that you can see. If these were extraterritorial or extraterrestrials, we'd get pretty bugged out over them. But effectively, friends, they are extraterrestrials. They are not of the land. They are not from here, but they are undersea creatures. This is a chimera, and it's a cartilaginous fish. There's no bone in this critter, one of the oldest fishes that's in the sea. A Dumbo, not elephant, but Dumbo octopus, and quite unique in its form and formation. He or she has their tentacles wrapped up ball-like in order to more hydrodynamically propel themselves. We're finding seamounts, I won't say everywhere we look, but something that's really remarkable is to be able to get proximate to an undersea volcano. And these volcanoes in the water allow us to get science observations right close to them and figure out what minerals are coming out of them. When we want to study mineral expansion or volcanic bursts in dry land, the scientists have to get the heck out of there, and you hope that your instrument doesn't melt. With seawater, the heat is rapidly dissipated and allows geologists to get right on top of volcanic eruptions. The real key is, how do you know where to go in order to find an eruption? And several of our science components within the exploration program in our Pacific Marine Environmental Lab and Oregon State, several of the university collaborators, we figured out how to do this by tracking heat in the ocean, heat signature, and then going to those areas where heat's being liberated and hope you're going to get close to a vent that's about ready to let go. This is one. We've had scientists under the ice realizing that the biological community under ice is more contributing to the stability of sea ice than perhaps may be the temperature above it. And the biological communities that live in there are remarkable. Here's a small venting system. It's a little grainy, I apologize, but this is an example of the kind of venting, short of a volcanic eruption, but the kind of venting that introduces minerals to seawater, and it's coming from the inner parts of the earth. And it's a fashion that really was not, it's a fashion of making that was really not understood at the time that at least I took biology, and we were taught that salt water is salty because of all the land runoff of rainwater. Don't think so. This is the mechanism that introduces minerals into the seawater. All the creatures that have evolved to live in our oceans are dependent upon the introduction of these minerals. A goosefish. Very timely acoustic announcement of a goosefish. This guy is found in shallow and deep. It's a pretty common life form. That primary dorsal spine that he's got right here has a little fleshy protuberance on it that wiggles in the current, and small fish are attracted to it, and then he just opens that big mouth of his and gobbles it on up. I wish I had a moving image of it for you. This guy is very extraterrestrial. This is an isopod. They're about as big as my shoe. They're pretty remarkable. Some of them are really small, some of them are big, but the point I want to make to you here is these are pretty odd life forms, but they're very much part of our planet. Many of you scuba divers may have seen these. Nudibranchs, familiar to some of you? They're beautiful. They exude a chemical compound that keeps stingers and other types of co-evolved marine threats to them away from them. As beautiful as they are, they have chemistry that basically doesn't allow other types of cells to hurt them. Anti-cancer compounds, stopping uncontrolled cell growth. There are many components that as we look, we learn more about our own health from marine organisms. This is a siphoning organism, a siphonophore, related more to a jellyfish, looks more floral. This guy I love. This is a Venus flytrap anemone, kind of a convenient name because of its look. But what's amazing about these is the abundance and number of places that you can find them, including settled on the back of crabs. Now, you would think this is like a 1 in a million shot. I have, and I've not been everywhere, but I have seen that in the deep sea 5 times. And what happens, apparently, is that the anemone settles on the back of anything, maybe a piece of sand, it's not going to grow, it's going to die. Previous slide, you saw it settle on a piece of hard coral. It can live and grow there. And here, it's on the back of a crab. He's probably growing very fast because as the crab eats, little bits of food escape. The anemone is enjoying digesting that food. And as the crab moves around, they both are happy. Eventually, the anemone will grow big, slow the crab down, crab dies, the anemone will die. But it's an interesting phenomenon to see where these things have landed. These are polychaete worms that actually eat methane, frozen methane. And this guy just had an attraction to the manipulator arm of the Woods Hole submarine Alvin. So, in summary, why do we explore? Let's go to the National Ocean Policy. That's something that President Obama has really underscored and put a lot of the administration's energy into. And exploration is able to support each of the key objectives, the 9 priorities in the National Ocean Policy. So we're following the direction of our president. You may recall this past summer, Secretary Kerry led an Our Oceans conference and also announced, as we were able to later implement, the creation of some Pacific marine preserves. Many of those preserves were created on the maps that were made by the Ocean Exploration Program. Going back to 2001, we had a presidential panel that created the need or defined the need for an exploration program. That's another reason why we explore. This was eventually put into law, and the 4 key objectives are listed for you. probably the most important one is to be mapping this underwater environment that we have. We're also working on new potential solutions and new technologies, replacing traditional methods of trying to count how many fish in the sea with more automated means, unmanned vehicles that can traverse the ocean waters and still count those fish. In terms of charting, this image shows you the multi-beam I described earlier, but do we need to keep the multi-beam on a ship, or could we put it on an independent vehicle and force multiply? Traditionally, oceanographers are collecting water at various depths in order to calculate components of heat exchange, climate change, etc. We can also do that by just using unmanned autonomous buoys, floats, gliders, and drifters. And for our ship, and is it possible to replace our ship with an autonomous vehicle that can do all of the above? Can we take this blank vehicle and send it to sea and have it collect through other means the answers to science questions that we are right now solving by traditional methods? Here's one cute way of doing it. Instead of bringing a sample home, which is pretty hard to get with a manipulator arm, take an image of it and print it in a 3D printer. That's on the Explorer right now. And how about labs on a chip? If we could use, through metagenomics and studies of genetics and the appearance of genes rather than individual species, what the components of a biological community are, we can answer many of the questions that we have right now sought to answer by towing a trawl net behind a ship to catch the fish, to cut them open, to analyze their tissues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We may be able to forecast fish populations just by looking at the genetic refuse that's in the water after a fish population swims through it. So as we get farther forward and far more advanced, you don't want to lose the excitement of being inside of a submersible and the nature of what that work is like, or the ability to firsthand humans put eyes on creatures like these. But whatever we do, we have to do more of. So I'm doing a time check right now, and I'm going to just hold you in temptation for maybe the possibility to come on back another time and talk a little bit more about the Titanic side of this question. So I'll just leave you with that temptation. But Congress asked us to do certain things with the Titanic. We did, and maybe that's a future discussion to have. But let's go explore the oceans. Thank you very much.